Terrible story. The father, whose 13-month-old baby died last week while in care of a convicted child abuser, said he pleaded with Children's Aid not to place his son with his grandfather. On the morning of the apprehension, he goes on to say, he flat out said, "If you place him with my dad, you're most likely going to kill my son," the 20-year-old father said about the day his baby was taken away. "I know that man, and he was violent with me my entire life." As reported in the Toronto Star on Thursday, a court document shows the Niagara Children's Aid Society knew the grandfather had physically abused his own infant son in 1995. The grandfather was just a teenager at the time, now in his mid-30s, according to the affidavit filed Wednesday by the Niagara Children's Aid Society in the Ontario Court of Justice. To talk more about all of this, Gary Dierenfeld is with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com, to find out more. He's with us now. Gary, good afternoon. How are you today?
Scott, good to be with you. It's been a while.
It has been. Too bad it's on such a sad occasion this time out. What is the policy here? I know that that whenever possible they try to keep these kids within their own family. How do you balance all this?
Yeah, isn't this what a tough job? So when a Children's Aid seeks to apprehend or take a child from a family or from a parent, by law, by mandate, they do have to consider first placing that child with some next of kin. And, it's not altogether uncommon that if the parent is abusive, neglectful, or harmful to the child, might they have learned that from their next of kin?
Yeah.
So here is a case where the child was placed with the grandfather, and the grandfather indeed does have a known history to the CAS of having abused the father of the child when that was his young son. But it begs the question: that grandfather was found to be abusive of his son when he was a teenage father himself. Now in his mid to late 30s, the CAS has to go in and reconsider and say, you were a teenager when you abused your son. Might you have grown up? Might you have learned? Might you be a different person? And so they have to assess the situation as it is now, not as it was that 20 years ago.
How do you... Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but clearly, it leads to mistakes. And so that challenge of balancing placing a child with next of kin yet being protective becomes a high-risk endeavor.
Why would the grandfather even be an option in this case? Why would the grandfather want to be a part of this if he had a history of this? You would guess if you have a history of child abuse or abusing kids that you're probably not that fond of them.
No, not necessarily. You could be fond of children. People who abuse their kids, it isn't necessarily because they're not fond of them. It may be because they know of no other ways with respect to how to parent and take care of kids. And so the issue may not be intent, but education, knowledge, how to manage oneself. So, why place a child with next of kin? Typically, it is better for the child to grow up with family, and family typically wants to have care of their kin. That part makes us all human.
How much do we know about the father? Why was he not in custody of the child?
Well, you know what I know, and that's from the news reports.
Right.
So we don't know why that child was taken from the natural father and placed with the grandfather. We only surmise that the child would have been at some sort of risk of harm with that 20-year-old dad as well. So we're not questioning whether it was a good or not decision to take the child from the natural father, but the placement decision, that's something that's going to rise to an inquest, I'm sure.
Well, let's talk about that. What happens with this process now? How will things change? Will it be radically different? And will we see a knee-jerk reaction that just does the opposite?
Well, in fact, things changed a number of years ago. At or about 2006, the result of another child's death in the care of family, where the grandparents were not investigated in terms of a prior abuse history or criminal record. And so those changes have it that regardless of where we're placing a child now, and particularly even if it's with kin, the Children's Aid is compelled to investigate the criminal history. And so this grandfather was known to have a criminal past.
Mm-hmm.
But, having a criminal past and having been abusive in the past still doesn't mean that maybe we haven't mended our ways. And so I can't second-guess these Children's Aid workers' thoughts about the appropriateness of that placement now. But the results are clear. The decision in retrospect was disastrous.
Obviously easy to play armchair quarterback at this point. How often in these situations is the solution not that obvious, and is the solution in most cases the best of two bad scenarios, or the best of a bad scenario?
Thank God, in a sense, we're only hearing of this one unfortunate death. We're not hearing this as an ongoing issue.
Yeah, good point.
So more often than not, the CAS is doing a thankless job keeping kids safe from harm and placing them in situations that are better from whence they came. So we don't hear about the success stories. We only hear about the failures. But these failures, in contrast to the successes, are happily far and few between. Unfortunately, a failure can be as disastrous as death, and that's what's happened here, of course.
So is this about changing policy or improving guidelines in some way, or is this just an anomaly? When, as you say, I mean, there's lots of kids that go through the system on a daily basis.
Yeah, this one may not be about changing policy as much as seeing if there was a breakdown in either communication or judgment in this particular case, because overall we have some very reasonable policies in place, and Children's Aid are compelled to check the background and criminal history of people with whom we entrust children.
We've talked many times about disciplining kids and how some feel that they don't have the ability to discipline their kids anymore because they can't hit them. There's an interesting quote in this story from the father that says, "I got hit with a belt, a shovel," he said. "I thought it was just discipline." Talk about breaking the cycle and how difficult that is, and how you do that.
Well, that is an interesting quote from the father, that in having been hit with a belt and shovel, he construed that as, if I read the quote appropriately, he construed that as reasonable discipline.
Yeah.
So it also causes you to wonder how he may have also been disciplining this young child. And so that's why we need conversations like you and I are having, so that we can reach the general public and help them to understand that, no, that kind of discipline is totally wrong, totally inappropriate. It's dangerous. It's abusive on so many levels. And just because we can't hit kids and shouldn't hit kids, it doesn't mean that we don't discipline them, though. It means that we use nonviolent means of redirecting, educating, teaching them right from wrong, but that it doesn't have to include violence.
Why do people not get that? Why do people not understand that you don't have to hit a kid in order to discipline them? Why do they feel that if you've taken that away, you've taken away the right for me to discipline my kid?
Well, first of all, we all extrapolate from our own experience and say, well, it didn't kill me.
Exactly.
I turned out all right.
Yeah.
So therefore, there's no harm to be done in this. We're acting on the basis of our own experience, and so people continue to do as people have been done too, and so it's hard to get the message across us that just because you survived, it doesn't mean everyone survived.
Yeah, good point.
Yeah. So helping people to get that broader perspective. I also work with a lot of folks who abuse alcohol, and they look at me and they say, well, everyone drinks. I say, well, where do you hang out? And they say, well, Joe's bar, Bob's bar. Well, you keep hanging out in places with people like yourself. Of course, you think everyone drinks. If you go to the library, the church, the grocery store, you're not going to be seeing people drinking. Good. So we're working hard to confront people's point of views and what they took as normal to them, to give them an alternate and hopefully a better experience.
Do we not have the discipline to discipline? I can think, my daughter who's turning 13, boy, there's nothing more crippling than taking away the device. I couldn't believe the effect that had on my kid. And
Dad, don't.
I know. You'd think it was just the worst possible thing I could. Oh, exactly. And I thought, my goodness, this is easier than I thought. Do you think we have the discipline to discipline?
Yeah, I have a blog out there, and in one of the blogs I wrote about parenting guts. And parenting guts is actually a term my wife coined to me when we were looking at how some friends of ours really weren't disciplining their child, and the child was running roughshod over the parent.
Yeah.
And it's as if they were afraid to discipline the kid for the pushback.
Yeah, it's like parental bullying now.
Yeah, and so I do implore parents to have parenting guts, the wherewithal to hold a child accountable, such that the child doesn't run amok. And that's not advocating abuse by any means.
It's funny how I was on a long plane trip recently, and we had the same scenario with a large family and kids running up and down the aisle of the plane. And it amazed me that we don't even learn from others' behavior the fact that there aren't other kids running up and down the plane, that perhaps yours shouldn't be. Do people just sort of ignore all of that?
Some parents are turning a blind eye. We have failed in this day and age to hold our kids accountable.
I just hear the phrase, boys will be boys a lot.
Oh, I hate that phrase. What kind of malarkey is that just reinforces that boys can't exercise self-control?
Yeah.
I mean, that's just poppycock, for lack of the real word I'd like to use.
Gary Dierenfeld has been with us, social worker, yoursocialworker.com, to find out more. A 13-month-old boy died after being placed with an abusive grandparent despite pleas from the father to Children's Aid not to put him there. Not a very great way to start our weekend, but Gary, thanks very much for the time and insight as always. I'm sure lots of this resonates with people. And have yourself a great long weekend.
Hey, you too, man. Great to have you back.